All right, I'm going to go straight to this interview. I want to talk to Matt Bruenig because we had a hell of a conversation going on in our messages on Twitter, dealing with some of his articles, and we see this going on. And actually, I want to talk to him about a little feud that he had today with Joan Walsh. First of all, Matt, how are you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for joining us. And before I do too much, I know a little bit about your bio. I don't have a lot about your bio because you're an elusive man on the interwebs. But I do know that you are, of course, you write at mattbrunig.com, and you're also a policy analyst for demos.org or .com.
Demos.org is the website.
Yeah. Awesome. So, anything else you want to tell us about yourself, or you want to just jump into this conversation?
They don't care what my bio is. Let's just go into the talk.
All right. All right. So I'm talking with Matt Bruenig, and I had a chance to read. I've been reading your blog a lot lately because I like that it's succinct, it's to the point, and it's data driven, and very pragmatic. And the articles that got my attention the most recently were the articles that you're doing on how white liberals and progressives treat the white working class. And they reject the white working class because they view the white working class as racist and bigots. And so they essentially demonize them. Whereas if you do I guess, the equitable thing, you would do the same thing to every group that you can categorize that is a bigot, right? That have bigoted tendencies. And you compared it to the treatment that the progressive and the establishment, how they treat African Americans who are overwhelmingly conservative when it comes to LGBTQ rights and marriage equality. All right. And so on the one hand, you have progressives who are shunning the white working class because they're bigots and they're racist. But those same exact people, they don't shun African Americans, even though they're homophobic and bigoted. They embrace them. Tell me a little bit more about that premise and what you found.
So yeah, I mean, you summarized it pretty well. What I was interrogating was some pieces at Salon and Slate and Freddie DeBoer and Above the Line. There was this discussion online that maybe the West Virginia primary prompted
Yep.
that was kind of, saying, oh, well, white working class, lower class whites are racist. And the upshot almost being, to hell with them,
Hmm.
they have these problems. And of course, that's true. I think upper class whites are racist as well, but there's no denying that lower class whites have racism issues, and
Hmm.
that's a problem, and we got to figure that out. But that doesn't mean to me that, well, your problems don't matter if you're, like, we've seen mortality for, like, middle class whites, go way up because of obesity and drug abuse and suicide. And
Hmm.
we've seen stagnant wages and poverty and all these kinds of things. Like, those are still problems, even if the people who experience those problems might have views that we see as problematic.
Hmm.
And as an analogy to that, I said, look at, the African American community. They just, the poll in 2015 opposed gay marriage 2 to 1.
Yep. Yep.
And liberals would call that sort of homophobic and, like, really problematic. But we don't say, hey, obviously it's not good that black people are getting mowed down by police and locked up and are, some of the poorest people in the country and job discriminate. I mean, just the whole gamut. We
Hmm.
don't say, well, you don't care about gays, I don't care about you and your problems.
Yeah.
That's not something we do
But that's
to
something we
them.
readily do with the white working class, and we say that, oh, we don't care about your economic plight because you're a racist bigot.
Right. And in one of my last post, there was a brief moment where I was trying to figure out, what's going on here, beneath the surface. What we have this seeming contradiction. Is there some way to resolve this contradiction and explain why there's this different treatment? And the idea I threw out there, which was actually proposed to me by Emmett Renson of Vox,
Hmm.
was that, well, basically this is almost a kind of political tribal calculation,
Hmm.
the understanding is that lower class whites certainly vote more Republican than Democrat,
Hmm.
and lower class blacks almost all vote Democrat. And so, when
Yeah.
someone in your family, of your political family, basically is has problematic issues. You try to deal with them and maybe try to persuade them, but you don't cast them out.
Right.
Um, Someone who's not in your family, maybe you're a little bit more willing to, be like, I don't care about your problems.
Yeah, and so as I was reading that, I'm like, I saw a roadblock. I saw multiple roadblocks why progressives have not turned on black people, right? Because one, progressives and liberals have for years used the language of racism against conservatives, right? We've cast this laid out narrative of the Republican Party just being batshit racist. And it's not just a narrative. Some of them are very much so racist. But it seems like a roadblock that you're going to run into as soon as you say anything about a black person. Because for the last 8 years, if you had any criticism of Barack Obama, you were a racist. So likewise, it would be extremely difficult for any progressive, LGBTQ or otherwise, to condemn the black community for their overly conservative views in regards to gay rights and LGBT and marriage equality, because it will instantly, you are running up against the somehow being called a racist. So to me, that was the first hurdle in a justification as to why LGBTQ activists and just progressives in general who aren't even gay or lesbian would never cross the black community in that way. And I like what you wrote, what you got from the gentleman at Vox, that the other side of that coin, in my opinion, is that it's a very calculated game, that they are willing to suffer this. They're willing to suffer something that they would consider bigoted for the sake of electoral expediency. What does that say to you? What do you think about that on a moral level, maybe, but even if just a pragmatic philosophical level?
Well, so one of the things that's interesting about that theory, if we suppose that theory is correct, and it seems plausible, there's the secondary question of how conscious are they of this?
Mm,
Because motivations operate on a often subconscious level. So I don't know that they,
actively doing this.
yeah, like I suspect it's just, you know, they don't say, oh, well, we need blacks to vote for us, so we got to kind of soft pedal this. Instead they build sort of justifications in their own mind. And you saw that a little bit with some of the stuff I quoted from 2008 when you had the Prop 8 stuff, where
Right.
there was just sort of all this text that was like, we need to reach out to them more. And you know what? We haven't dealt with their issues. The
Hmm.
LGBT community is not dealing with racism. We have racism in our own ranks. We're not dealing, there was all this sort of language that came out that, you know, allowed you to resolve that without just being like, well, we need blacks to vote for Democrats,
Right.
but we want to get gay rights. Maybe we can hold out, which is ultimately what they did, and we can get it through the courts or something. And I don't think it's calculated on that level.
Mm.
It's probably just resolved on
On
a
a
more
quick.
subconscious level.
I think. I mean, maybe you're giving them. And however you want to. I think some people are doing this straight out calculation, right? And
I
and
think
here,
it's cynical.
yeah, I'm more cynical than you are, right? So I think some of them are making that calculation because they know black people. To be honest with you, there's a lot of black people who are just one racist comment away from becoming Republican. I've actually heard many African Americans say this: if it wasn't for the racism of the Republican Party, they would become Republicans. So I think that there is a very calculated estimation on the part of some thought leaders and some political leaders on the Democratic side to say that we can't cross the African American community on this issue, because if we do, we will run them directly into the arms of the Republican Party. Now, that's just coming from my perspective of being in years in the black church, years in the black politics, and just knowing that there's a good percentage of African Americans who are very conservative, and the only reason they are not in the Republican Party is because they view the Republicans as being racist. But I want to come up for air a little bit, because the real conversation that I think you're having, and correct me if I'm wrong, the real conversation that you're having with these articles, this series of articles on how we demonize the white working class, but we engage African Americans, even though we both have our groups have our own versions of bigotry. And this is not anecdotal. This is based on polling, our rejection of LGBTQ rights and marriage equality specifically. So it's not just this casual observation that you're making up. This is in the data. Black people are not pro-gay overwhelmingly. But I think the conversation that you're having is really shining a light on this, and forgive this class term, but this bourgeois white liberal who really has a condescending gaze on people who are they feel and view are lower than them. And they can express this condescension towards white working class people because electorally it doesn't cost them anything. But they couldn't possibly express this condescension towards poor black people because electorally it cost them their ass. That's the subtext that I read in your articles. Or am I reading too deeply into it?
That's I had not contemplated that, but that doesn't seem implausible to me. I
Hmm.
mean, I grew up in Texas, and I was lower class white, and the upper class whites, they were definitely very racist, and they also didn't like white trash,
Hmm.
as they termed it, and they were certainly seemed more willing to publicly talk about white trash and how they didn't like that than they did racism. Though I would say they were equally hateful of both.
Mm.
So when you hear some of when you see some of the things they talk about with the lower class whites, they're uneducated or uncultured or whatever, right? There seems to be this they like NASCAR and crappy beer, and they watch stupid shows, and
Hmm.
there's this sense, you know you could say similar things if you wanted. I mean, that's just the nature of being lower class in societies. You have different cultural habits. You have less education. That's true of white people. That's true of poor black people. That's true of poor Latino people. They're living in different worlds, culturally and educationally. And so anything you're saying about poor white people, you could probably say about most poor black people, when
Hmm.
it comes to sort of lack of quote unquote sophistication and that kind of thing. So maybe maybe they just have disdain across the board for that lack of sophistication, like you said, and just feel comfortable when it comes to lower class whites.
Yeah, but think about it. You can absolutely say, let's just think culturally right now in 2016. Right now, it wouldn't cost me a thing to get out here and say that white racist trailer park trash, right? It might cost me a little bit because I'm trying to do this little show, right? It might cost me just a little. But if a white person who's just as progressive as me comes out and say, just switch out trailer park trash and say ghetto trash, holy shit, that's the end of their career. So even on a cultural level, if they have this condescension towards African Americans, who they view as bigoted anyway because we don't support LGBTQ rights and marriage equality more specifically, then it's something that they're culturally not able to really vent that anger that we see being vented towards poor white people and working class white people online and in the media and in print every single day. It's like a West Virginia opened up the floodgates of white progressives who absolutely loathe white poor people. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an excellent. You have persuaded me. I hadn't really considered that, but it's interesting to think from your perspective when you see people banging, or beating up on white trash or whatever. To you in your brain, you're like, you know what? they probably think that of
They're,
black people as
exactly.
well.
They're only one word. They're only one adjective away from saying it about me, right? So that's why
Right, yeah.
and I don't really have a better term, and I hate to be redundant, but when I see bourgeois white, let me stop there, white liberals. Jumping down the throats of poor white people, many of whom I grew up next to. I know for a fact that kind of condescension is really only one adjective away from describing and being not describing but being applied to me. So I don't get when I see it done towards white poor people. I don't co-sign, and this is me. I'm just an oddball, right? I think there's some black people who co-sign on this, right, because it helps them alleviate the fact that we have been oppressed for many years. But for me, it's like, no, if this white person is going to be this hateful and mean towards this poor white person, then they are just a closed one door, behind smoke closed doors from talking about me in the same way. And so I just feel that they can't publicly express this, but they express it when I walk by and they lock their doors or they clutch their purse, and they're supposed to be a post-racial society. So, and this is what I read. I mean, honestly, when I read your work, this is what it start piecing together. So I thought that's what you were working towards in many ways. And actually, I honestly think that's what you may not be expressly saying, but the subtext of what you're saying really pieces that together for me.